The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years, and in that time, the great civilizations had grown comfortable and soft. They had forgotten what true fear felt like, but they were about to remember. It started in the outer reaches of the Andromeda Arm, in a region of space so distant that most star maps did not even bother to name it. A mining colony sent a distress signal that lasted exactly for seconds, before cutting off into silence, and when the rescue ships arrived, they found nothing, no station, no debris, no bodies. Just empty space where thousands of souls had lived and worked only hours before. The Galactic Concord, that ancient alliance of 400 species, sent investigators to determine what had happened. These investigators also vanished without a trace. And then the planet nearest to the mining colony went dark, and then the next planet, and then an entire star system simply stopped appearing on every sensor in the galaxy. They called it the darkness at first, because that was all anyone could see when they looked at the affected regions. There was no light, no radiation, no energy signatures of any kind, just an absolute void that seemed to swallow everything it touched. And it was growing larger with each passing day. The Concord assembled its greatest scientific minds to study the phenomenon, and after months of careful observation from safe distances, they finally understood what they were dealing with. It was not a natural disaster or a spatial anomaly, it was alive, and it was hungry. The shadows, as they came to be known, were beings unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They were not made of matter or energy in any conventional sense, but rather seemed to be composed of the very absence of light itself, and they moved through space like a dark tide, consuming everything in their path. High Admiral Kethra of the Velith Imperium was the first to attempt military engagement with the Shadows. She commanded the most powerful fleet in Concord space, 300 crystalline warships that could channel the energy of stars themselves, and she was confident that no enemy could stand against such might. Her fleet entered the Shadow Zone with weapons blazing, pouring enough firepower into the darkness to crack planets and shatter moons. The Concord's listening posts detected the initial volleys, bright flashes of energy that lit up their sensors like miniature suns, and then nothing. No explosions, no impacts, no sign that the weapons had done anything at all. The Shadows simply absorbed the energy, drinking it in like water into sand. And then they moved forward and swallowed the fleet whole. Kethra's final transmission was a single word, spoken in a voice that trembled with disbelief. Impossible. The Corvani hegemony tried next, sending their gravity-bending dreadnoughts to tear the Shadows apart with artificial singularities and spatial distortions. The Shadows flowed around the attacks like water around stones, and then they flowed through the ships themselves, and the dreadnoughts crumpled like paper as the darkness passed through them. The Mindweavers, that ancient race of psychic masters, attempted to communicate with the Shadows, to understand their nature and find some way to negotiate peace. Their most powerful telepaths reached out with minds that could move planets and reshape reality itself, and they screamed, every single one of them, screaming until their voices gave out and their minds shattered like glass. The few who survived spoke of what they had felt, an endless hunger, cold and vast and utterly alien, a consciousness that had drifted through the void between galaxies for billions of years, consuming everything it encountered. And it did not understand mercy or negotiation or peace, it only understood feeding. 17 star systems fell in the first year, and 43 more in the second. The Concord's greatest weapons proved useless. Their most brilliant strategies accomplished nothing, and the shadow tide continued to advance toward the galactic core. On Axis Prime, the ancient capital world of the Concord, the High Assembly met in emergency session to discuss their options. Representatives from 400 species filled the great chamber, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the air was thick with fear and desperation. "We have tried everything," declared Counselor Vexamith of the Insectoid Combine, his compound eyes reflecting the grim faces around him. "Our weapons cannot harm them. Our shields cannot stop them. Our greatest minds cannot understand them. We are facing extinction." The chamber erupted in chaos, voices shouting over each other in dozens of languages, some calling for evacuation plans, others demanding new weapon development, and still others simply weeping for worlds already lost. Ambassador Kethra, sister of the fallen High Admiral, rose from her seat and waited for silence. Her crystalline form flickered with grief, but her voice was steady when she spoke. There is one option we have not considered. One species we have deliberately avoided contacting the humans of the Sol system. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the chamber turned to stare at the Velith ambassador, and the expressions ranged from shock to horror to outright disgust. The humans? Vexamoth hissed, his mandibles clicking with agitation. Those violent primitives from the Orion army, you cannot be serious. They are anything but primitive, Kethra replied calmly. We simply chose to see them that way because it made us feel safer. The humans had first made contact with the Concord 500 years ago, and from the very beginning, they had terrified the elder races. They were not physically impressive, not particularly long-lived, not especially gifted with natural abilities, but they were relentless, adaptable, and utterly fearless in ways that made no sense to civilized species. Within a single century of achieving space flight, they had colonized a dozen worlds and built a military fleet that rivaled species 10 times their age. They fought wars against themselves with such frequency and intensity that the Concord's observers could barely keep track, and yet somehow they always emerged stronger than before. The Concord had made a deliberate decision to exclude humanity from their alliance. They had established blockades around human space, denied them access to hyperspace technology, and quietly hoped that they would eventually destroy themselves. Before becoming a threat to galactic peace, they wage war for entertainment, Vexamoth protested. They are barely civilized. Bringing them into this conflict would be like unleashing a plague. To cure a disease, Kethra's form pulsed with cold light. The shadows are 90 cycles from Axis Prime, and we have no other options. We can die with our pride intact, or we can ask the humans for help and perhaps survive. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Concord would send an emissary to Earth. The diplomatic vessel Mercy of Stars was the finest ship in the Concord's fleet, a gleaming masterpiece of crystalline architecture and advanced technology that had carried ambassadors to 1,000 worlds. Its crew had been chosen for their experience and composure, and its captain had never failed a mission in 3 centuries of service. None of that mattered when they emerged from hyperspace above Earth. High Emissary Torvan stood at the observation deck and stared at the blue-green world below, trying to control the trembling in his secondary limbs. He was a Corvani diplomat with a millennium of experience, a master negotiator who had brokered peace between species that had warred for 10,000 years. And he had never been more nervous in his entire life. The humans had detected their rival within seconds. That alone was remarkable, since the Mercy of Stars was equipped with the most advanced stealth systems in the galaxy. But the humans tracked them as easily as a child following a bright light in a dark room. Unidentified vessel, you have entered Sol System space without authorization, a calm female voice announced over their communication system. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or you will be removed. Torvan noted the choice of words, not destroyed or attacked, but removed, as if erasing a Concord diplomatic ship would be a minor inconvenience, rather than an act of war. This is High Emissary Torvan of the Galactic Concord, requesting permission to approach Earth for diplomatic discussions, he replied, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. We come in peace and seek only to speak with your leaders. There was a pause, and then the voice returned. Permission granted. Emissary, you will follow the escort to the designated landing coordinates exactly, and any deviation will be treated as hostile action. 2 ships appeared on either side of the Mercy of Stars, and Torvan felt his crew stiffen with shock. They had not detected these vessels approaching, had not seen them on any sensor until they were already in formation, and the ships themselves were unlike anything in the Concord's databases. They were not elegant or beautiful. They were brutal, angular constructs of dark metal and sharp edges, covered in weapon systems that the Mercy of Stars could not even identify, and they radiated a sense of lethal purpose that made every instinct in Torvan's body scream. For him to flee, the escort led them down through Earth's atmosphere to a military installation on a large island continent. There were no welcoming ceremonies, no crowds of curious onlookers, no signs of the elaborate rituals that typically accompanied diplomatic visits. In civilized space, just a landing pad surrounded by armed soldiers, and a single woman waiting to receive them. Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Force was a small human by any measure, barely reaching Torvald's chest, with dark hair pulled back tightly and eyes that seemed to evaluate him as a threat assessment, rather than a diplomatic contact. She wore a simple uniform without decoration, and she did not smile when he approached. "Emissary Torvald," she said, her voice flat and professional. "I am Admiral Tanaka, and I will be your point of contact during this visit. Follow me." There was no offer of refreshment, no tour of the facilities, no small talk to establish rapport. Tanaka led him directly to a conference room where a dozen other humans waited, all of them in military uniforms, all of them watching him with the same calculating expressions. "You have traveled a long way," Tanaka said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "I assume the Concorde would not have broken centuries of deliberate isolation without a compelling reason, so tell me, emissary, what do you want?" Torvald had prepared a speech, a carefully crafted appeal to shared interests and mutual benefit that would slowly build toward the request for assistance. Looking at the cold faces around him, he realized that such an approach would be worse than useless. "The galaxy is dying," he said simply. "A force we call the Shadows is consuming star system after star system, and nothing we have tried can stop them. Our fleets have been destroyed. Our weapons are useless, and if something does not change, every civilization in the galaxy will be gone within a decade." He told them everything: the first disappearances, the failed military campaigns, the psychic contact that had driven the Mindweavers mad, the desperate vote in the assembly that had led to this mission. He held nothing back, showed them every piece of data the Concorde had gathered, and when he finished, he waited for their response. The humans did not react the way he expected. There was no shock, no fear, no expressions of sympathy for the billions who had already died. Instead, they leaned forward with interest, passing data tablets between themselves, pointing at specific details in the reports. "Energy absorption across the entire electromagnetic spectrum," one of them muttered. "That's actually impressive. Look at the pattern of expansion," another said. "They're not random, they're methodical, efficient, almost like a harvesting operation." Admiral Tanaka studied the data for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And then she looked up at Torvald with something that might have been amusement. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, emissary. For 500 years, your Concorde has treated humanity as dangerous animals to be contained. You blockaded our expansion, denied us technology, and did everything in your power to keep us isolated from the rest of the galaxy. And now that something is actually threatening you, you come to us for help." Torvald's secondary hearts clenched with shame. "That is accurate, Admiral. And what exactly do you expect us to do about creatures that have defeated every weapon in your arsenal?" This was the moment Torvald had dreaded. He had no answer, no clever argument that could convince these people to sacrifice themselves for a galaxy that had rejected them. "I do not know," he admitted. "I only know that you are our last hope, and I am prepared to offer whatever terms you require." Tanaka's eyes narrowed. "Send all your data to my tactical team, every battle record, every sensor reading, every analysis your scientists have produced. We will review it and give you our answer." For 3 days, Torvald waited in a small but comfortable room while the humans analyzed the information. Occasionally he would hear sounds from elsewhere in the facility: laughter, arguments, the hum of machinery, but no one came to update him, and he began to fear the worst. On the 4th day, Admiral Tanaka summoned him back to the conference room. The atmosphere had changed, and Torvald could not identify exactly how until he saw their faces. They were smiling, every single one of them, with expressions that his cultural database flagged as predatory. "Emissary Torvald," Tanaka said, "return to your Concorde and deliver this message. The first battle fleet of Earth will arrive at the Virados system in 30 cycles, and we strongly recommend that all Concorde vessels evacuate the engagement zone before our arrival." Relief flooded through Torvald's body. "You will help us? Help you?" Tanaka's smile widened. "Emissary, we have been developing weapons for decades that we have never had a proper target to test them against. Your Shadows just volunteered." She leaned forward, and her eyes were cold and bright. "We're not doing this for the Concorde. We're doing this because somewhere out there is an enemy that thinks it's the scariest thing in the universe, and we are going to correct that assumption." The Mercy of Stars raced back toward Concorde space at maximum speed, carrying news that would change the fate of the galaxy. Behind it, in the Sol system, humanity began to move with a speed and efficiency that would have terrified the Concorde's leaders if they had witnessed it. Within 6 hours of Admiral Tanaka's decision, every military installation on Earth and her colonies received the mobilization order. Within 12 hours, the first battle fleet was assembling in high orbit above Mars. Within 24 hours, 144 warships were ready for deployment. Fleet Admiral Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of the Yu's unconquered sun, watching his fleet take formation around him, and felt a grim satisfaction spreading through his chest. This was the moment humanity had been preparing for since the day the Concorde had tried to cage them. The elder races of the galaxy had made a critical error 5 centuries ago. They had looked at humanity and seen only the violence, the wars, the constant conflict that seemed to define their species, and they had assumed that this made humans primitive, uncivilized, dangerous, but ultimately containable. They had not understood that human violence was not a weakness but a forge. Every war, every conflict, every struggle for survival had hammered humanity into something harder, sharper, more lethal than any species the galaxy had ever produced. The Concorde's blockade had been designed to keep humanity contained while they slowly stagnated and declined. Instead, it had given them something they had never had before: a clear enemy, a unified purpose, and centuries of undisturbed time to prepare. While the Concorde developed elegant weapons based on energy manipulation and psychic resonance, weapons designed for wars that followed rules and respected boundaries, humanity had pursued a different path entirely. They had asked themselves one simple question: if we ever face an enemy that wants to destroy us completely, what would we need to win? The answer had led them down roads that the civilized species of the galaxy had never dared to travel. They had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself, taming energies that other species considered too dangerous to even study, contained singularities that could crush planets into points of infinite density, antimatter warheads that released the pure energy of complete mass conversion, plasma cannons that fired bolts of superheated matter at temperatures exceeding the cores of stars. These were the tools humanity had crafted in their centuries of isolation. But their greatest achievement, the weapon that had never been tested at full power because no safe testing ground existed, was the Helios Array. Admiral Chen Wei turned his attention to the massive focusing assembly that dominated the forward section of the unconquered sun. It was 3 kilometers long and nearly 1 kilometer wide, a complex arrangement of focusing crystals and magnetic containment fields that could channel the power of a star into a single, devastating beam. The theory behind the Helios ray was simple. Instead of generating energy and projecting it at a target, the array would capture the ambient stellar radiation in a system, concentrate it by a factor of several million, and release it in a focused burst that would make the target star look dim by comparison. The practical implications were terrifying. The array did not merely destroy targets, it erased the concept of darkness from local spacetime, flooding entire sectors with radiation levels that nothing could survive. The United Earth Council had forbidden the use of the Helios ray. Within 3 light years of any inhabited system, the collateral damage from a full-power discharge would sterilize worlds, blind sensor systems across half a sector, and leave a radiation signature that would persist for decades. But the Verados system had no inhabited worlds anymore. The shadows had already consumed everything there, and that made it the perfect testing ground. Admiral Captain Sarah Morrison, his executive officer, reported from the tactical station. All ships report ready for hyperspace transition. The fleet is at full combat readiness. Chen Wei nodded slowly, running his eyes across the formation one final time. The ships of the first battle fleet were not beautiful by any standard the Concorde would recognize. They were angular, brutal, covered in weapons and armor rather than elegant curves and decorative features. Each ship was a mobile apocalypse, designed with one purpose in mind: to deliver overwhelming, decisive violence to any target that threatened humanity's survival. They had no diplomatic suites, no comfortable quarters for alien guests, no systems designed for anything except warfare at the highest level. "Signal all ships," Chen Wei ordered, his voice calm and steady. "We transition to hyperspace in 15 minutes. Final systems checks and crew preparation." Throughout the fleet, men and women moved to their battle stations with practiced efficiency. There was no fear in their movements, no hesitation or uncertainty. They had trained for this moment their entire careers, and they were eager to finally put their training to use. In the crew quarters of the destroyer UES Righteous Fury, Lieutenant James Okonkwo gathered his damage control team for a final briefing. They were young, most of them on their first combat deployment, and he could see the excitement in their eyes. "Listen carefully," he told them, keeping his voice level. "We are about to engage an enemy that has destroyed fleets of hundreds of ships. Without taking a single casualty, do not let that concern you, because those fleets were not us." He pulled up an image of the shadow formations on his data tablet. "These things have never faced human weapons. They have never encountered an enemy that refuses to stop fighting. They have never experienced what happens when humanity decides something needs to die. They are about to learn." Similar scenes played out across every ship in the fleet. Officers briefed their crews, engineers ran final checks on weapons systems, and pilots prepared their fighter craft for launch. The entire force hummed with anticipation, a coiled spring ready to release. Admiral Chen Wei watched the timer count down toward the transition moment, thinking about what lay ahead. He had read every report from the Concorde's failed engagements, studied every tactical analysis, considered every theory about the nature of the shadows. The elder races had approached the problem with caution and scientific curiosity. They had tried to understand the shadows, to find weaknesses, to develop targeted solutions, and they had failed because they had not understood a fundamental truth about warfare. Sometimes understanding your enemy was not necessary. Sometimes analysis and precision were less effective than overwhelming, brutal force. Sometimes the best strategy was simply to bring more destruction than anything could survive. The shadows had evolved in the void between galaxies, in the endless darkness where light was rare and precious. They had learned to absorb energy, to drink in radiation, to consume anything that glowed, but they had never encountered anything like what humanity was about to bring. "All ships," Chen Wei announced over the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Chen Wei. In 5 minutes, we will transition to the Virados system and engage the enemy." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over his words. The Concorde believes these shadows are invincible. They believe nothing can stop them, that the galaxy is doomed to fall into darkness. We are going to prove them wrong. We are humanity. We were born on a world that tried to kill us. We survived by learning to fight back, and we have spent 5 centuries preparing for the moment when we would face a true threat. That moment has come, and we are ready. Prepare for hyperspace transition. The stars stretched into lines of light as 144 ships tore through the dimensional barrier, racing toward a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy forever. Behind them, Earth continued to spin serenely, its people going about their daily lives, trusting their defenders to do what humanity had always done: survive, adapt, and overcome. The shadows had consumed 17 star systems and believed themselves unstoppable. They were about to learn that darkness, no matter how deep, cannot exist where the light is strong enough. The Concorde observation fleet held position at the edge of the Virados system, maintaining what their commanders hoped was a safe distance from the horror that had consumed the inner planets. 47 ships from a dozen different species gathered to witness either humanity's salvation of the galaxy or their spectacular destruction. High Commander Velithos of the Velith Imperium stood at the tactical display of his flagship, the Crystal Song, watching the sphere of absolute darkness that had once been a thriving star system. 3 inhabited worlds, 2 billion souls, 17 orbital stations all gone, swallowed by an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every victory. The shadow sphere now measured 8 light minutes across, a region of space so completely consumed that not a single photon escaped its boundaries. Sensors showed nothing inside: no heat, no radiation, No energy signatures of any kind, just an absence where reality should have been. The humans claim they will arrive within the hour, his sensor officer reported, her crystalline form flickering with barely concealed doubt. They have transmitted instructions for us to move our fleet to these coordinates before their attack begins. Velithos studied the suggested position and felt his secondary hearts clench with unease. The humans wanted the observation fleet to retreat another 2 light minutes from the engagement zone, which seemed reasonable, but the tone of their message had not been a request. Signal all vessels to comply, he ordered reluctantly. We are here to observe, not to interfere. The observation fleet repositioned itself, settling into a formation that gave them clear sensor coverage of the shadow sphere, while maintaining the distance the humans had demanded. Around Velithos, officers murmured to each other in voices tinged with fear and skepticism. Do you truly believe the humans can succeed where our greatest fleets have failed? His executive officer asked quietly. The shadows have consumed over 300 Concord warships in this system alone. Velithos did not answer immediately. He had studied the reports from the diplomatic mission to Earth, had seen the data on human military capabilities, and he was not sure what to believe. The numbers seemed impossible. The weapons described seemed more like fantasy than reality. I believe we are about to find out, he said finally. The hyperspace signatures appeared without warning. 144 points of distortion, tearing through the dimensional barrier with brutal, inelegant force. The Concord's ships used carefully calculated entry vectors that minimized spatial stress and allowed for graceful emergence. The humans simply punched through like a fist through paper. The first battle fleet of Earth arrived in perfect formation, spreading across a front nearly 1,000,000 kilometers wide. Velithos stared at his tactical display in shock as the sensor data flooded in, and for a long moment, he could not process what he was seeing. The human ships were ugly. There was no other word for them. They lacked the flowing lines and artistic design that characterized Concord vessels, instead presenting angular hulls covered in weapons systems and armor plating that made them look more like mobile fortresses than starships. And at their center, a vessel that made Velithos' crew whisper prayers to gods they had not believed in for centuries. The U's unconquered sun, 3 kilometers of pure military hardware dominated by a focusing array that pointed directly at the shadow sphere. This is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Defense Force. A calm voice announced on all frequencies. Concord vessels, you have 90 seconds to achieve minimum safe distance from your current position. We are about to remove the shadow presence from the system. Remove. Velithos almost laughed at the audacity of the statement. The shadows had consumed a fleet of 300 warships in the system, had absorbed enough firepower to crack continents, had proven themselves immune to every weapon the Concord could deploy. And this human admiral spoke of removing them as if it were a simple maintenance task. High Commander, his sensor officer reported, her voice suddenly strained with confusion. The human flagship is charging some kind of weapon system. Power readings are that cannot be correct. Report, Velithos demanded. The energy buildup in that vessel's forward array is exceeding our sensor's maximum measurement capacity. I am reading power levels that would require the output of a small star to generate. This should not be possible. Across the fleet, similar reports were flowing in from every ship's sensor operators. The Concord's instruments could not accurately measure what the humans were doing, because nothing in their experience had prepared them for weapons that operated at these scales. The 90 seconds passed. The Concord fleet had retreated to the maximum safe distance, and then the Helios ray activated. For one eternal instant, the unconquered sun became the brightest object in the Veratos system. The focusing array captured and concentrated the ambient stellar radiation from the distant sun, amplified it by a factor that the Concord's scientists would later struggle to calculate, and released it in a single, devastating beam. A lance of condensed solar fury struck the shadow sphere. Plasma, radiation, exotic particles compressed into a weapon that existed at the boundary between physics and impossibility, and the darkness screamed. Velithos felt it in his crystalline bones, a psychic shriek of agony and disbelief that echoed across dimensions. Every telepathically sensitive being in the observation fleet collapsed. overwhelmed by the raw pain radiating from an entity that had never known pain before. The shadows had evolved in the lightless void between galaxies. They had spent billions of years drifting through absolute darkness, consuming the occasional photon like rare delicacies, growing and spreading and believing themselves the ultimate predators of the cosmos. They had never encountered anything like this. Light did not merely damage them, it unmade them. Where the Helios ray's beam struck, the shadow substance simply ceased to exist. The concentrated radiation was so intense, so overwhelming, that the darkness could not absorb it. Instead, it was burned away, erased, reduced to nothing. And the humans did not stop with a single shot. The rest of the fleet opened fire in coordinated sequence, 143 secondary vessels adding their own weapons to the assault. Antimatter warheads detonated with the fury of small suns, filling space with expanding spheres of pure energy. Plasma torpedoes painted the void in burning gold, each one carrying enough thermal energy to melt a small moon. Kinetic rounds accelerated to relativistic speeds by magnetic accelerators struck the shadow sphere at velocities that defied sanity, transferring so much energy on impact that the laws of physics seemed to bend around them. Nuclear devices designed for planetary bombardment lit the darkness. With the fires of human ingenuity, the shadow sphere convulsed, pulling in on itself as it tried to escape the onslaught. But there was nowhere to run. The human fleet had surrounded it, pouring destruction into its mass from every angle. And the Helios ray fired again and again, each blast carving away more of the ancient darkness. Velithos watched in stunned silence as the tactical display updated. The shadow sphere was shrinking, visibly diminishing as the human weapons burned it away. Something that the Concord's greatest minds had declared impossible was happening before his eyes. 40% reduction in shadow mass, his sensor officer reported, her voice trembling with shock. 50%, 60%, they are winning. The battle lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it ended, when the human fleet finally ceased fire and the radiation levels began to subside, there was nothing left of the shadow sphere, the entity that had consumed 17 star systems, and trillions of lives had been erased from existence, burned away by the fury of a species that the Concorde had tried to contain. Admiral Chen Wei's voice echoed across the communication channels, calm and professional as if he had done nothing more remarkable than complete a routine training exercise. All vessels, cease fire and begin post-engagement assessment. Concorde observers, you may approach to confirm the target's destruction. The Crystal Song moved forward on trembling engines, her crew unable to fully process what they had witnessed. As they approached the former location of the shadow sphere, their sensors confirmed what their eyes had already told them: there was nothing there. Not a trace, not a fragment, not a single molecule of the darkness that had threatened to consume the galaxy. Velithos stood at his observation deck, staring at empty space, and tried to find words for the report he would have to send to the Concorde Assembly. He had come to witness either a miracle or a disaster, and what he had seen was somehow both a miracle for the galaxy and a disaster for every species that had ever believed humanity should be contained. The humans had proven something today that would reshape galactic politics for millennia to come. They were not dangerous animals to be caged, not primitive savages to be feared. They were the most effective predators the universe had ever produced, and they had just demonstrated exactly what happened when they chose to hunt. High Commander Velithos submitted his report to the Concorde Assembly with trembling hands, knowing that the words he had written would change everything. The recording that accompanied his report spoke for itself: 47 seconds of overwhelming, impossible violence, followed by silence and the clear stars that had not been visible in that region for months. The assembly watched in absolute stillness as the footage played. Representatives from 400 species stared at their displays, with expressions ranging from shock to terror to something that looked very much like hope. "This is unprecedented," Ambassador Kether said when the recording ended, her crystalline form pulsing with barely contained emotion. "The shadows have been completely destroyed, and the humans did it in less than a minute." "They have not been completely destroyed," Counselor Vexameth corrected, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "There are still shadow concentrations in 12 other systems. The threat remains, As if in answer to his words, a communication request appeared on the main display. Admiral Chen Wei's face filled the screen, calm and composed, with the bridge of the unconquered sun visible behind him. "Members of the Concord Assembly," he said, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. "I trust you have reviewed High Commander Velithos' report on our engagement at Veratos." "We have," Kethra replied carefully. "The Concord is deeply grateful for your assistance, Admiral. We acknowledge that we misjudged humanity, and we are prepared to discuss terms for, with respect, Ambassador." Chen Wei interrupted, his tone remaining perfectly polite. "We are not finished. My fleet is currently en route to the Corvani remnant, where our intelligence indicates the largest remaining shadow concentration exists. We expect to arrive in approximately 12 hours. The assembly erupted in confused murmurs. The Corvani remnant had been written off as lost months ago. Its 3 surviving stations evacuated after a shadow mass had consumed the system's primary. "You intend to continue the campaign?" Kethra asked, unable to hide her surprise. "We intend to finish what we started," Chen Wei replied. "The shadows are a threat to all life in the galaxy, including human life. We will not stop until every trace of them has been eliminated." He paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "You are welcome to send observer vessels if you wish. We recommend they maintain a distance of at least 3 light minutes from our engagement zones." The connection closed, and the assembly sat in stunned silence. The humans were not asking for permission, not negotiating terms, not seeking approval. They were simply doing what they had decided needed to be done. Over the following months, the first battle fleet hunted the shadows across 12 star systems with patient, methodical efficiency. Each engagement followed the same pattern. The human fleet would arrive, position themselves around the shadow concentration, and then unleash destruction on a scale that made the Concord's greatest weapons look like children's toys. The Helios ray fired again and again. Each blast erased another pocket of darkness. Each engagement proved once more that the shadows were not invincible. They had simply never faced an enemy capable of bringing enough light to burn them away. The Concord sent observer vessels to every battle, recording everything for analysis and study. Their scientists worked frantically to understand the principles behind human weapons, hoping to replicate even a fraction of their power. But the more they learned, the more they realized how far behind they truly were. Human technology was not simply more advanced than the Concord's. It followed entirely different principles, pursued entirely different goals. Where the Concord had developed weapons for limited conflicts between civilized species, humanity had prepared for total war against existential threats. They assumed we would never face something like the shadows. Admiral Tanaka explained during a rare diplomatic reception on Earth, speaking to a group of Concord observers who had requested insight into human military philosophy. They built weapons for wars that followed rules. "We built weapons for wars where extinction was the price of defeat." She gestured to a display showing the unconquered sun in orbit above Mars. "Every human ship is designed around one simple question: can this vessel survive and continue fighting even if everything else has been destroyed? We do not build elegant weapons. We build weapons that win." The final shadow concentration was cornered in a dead system at the very edge of explored space. It was the largest mass yet recorded, a sphere of darkness that had apparently been gathering strength for the final push toward the galactic core, and it had been growing, absorbing energy from distant stars, preparing for a confrontation it believed would decide the fate of the galaxy. The humans brought for fleets to that engagement 576 warships, arranged in a sphere of their own, surrounding the darkness from every angle, with the unconquered sun and her sister dreadnoughts positioned at key points around the perimeter. Admiral Chen Wei commanded from the flagship, but the operation was coordinated by Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Okafor, the highest-ranking officer in the United Earth Defense Force. She had overseen the entire Shadow campaign, and she intended to personally witness its conclusion. "All vessels report ready," she announced over the fleet-wide channel. "On my mark, we end this." For Helios arrays fired simultaneously, their beams crossing at the center of the shadow mass. Antimatter warheads detonated in chains. Nuclear fire blazed across the void. and kinetic rounds struck with the force of cosmic judgment. The shadow mass thrashed and convulsed, shrieking across psychic frequencies that were felt by sensitive beings across half the galaxy. It tried to flee, to scatter, to escape the overwhelming assault, but the human fleet had sealed every route, and there was nowhere left to run. The engagement lasted 2 minutes and 17 seconds. When it ended, the last shadow in the galaxy had been erased, burned away by the accumulated fury of a species that had spent 5 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. On Axis Prime, the Concord Assembly watched the final engagement in real time via quantum-linked communication. When the last shadow vanished from their sensors, a cheer rose from the assembled representatives, a sound of relief and joy that echoed through the ancient halls. But the celebration was tempered by a new understanding, a realization that had been growing since the first battle at Verados. The galaxy had been saved, but it would never be the same. The Concord had spent 3,000 years believing that they represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They had developed weapons and philosophies based on the assumption that rational beings would always prefer peace to war, that violence was a primitive solution to problems that could be better solved through negotiation and compromise. Humanity had shattered that assumption. They had demonstrated that sometimes peace was not possible, that sometimes the only answer to an existential threat was overwhelming force, and they had proven themselves masters of that force in ways the Concord could not match. They are requesting a meeting, Kethra reported to the Assembly 6 months after the final shadow was destroyed. Admiral Tanaka and Fleet Admiral Okafor will arrive at Axis Prime within the week. They wish to discuss humanity's relationship with the Concord moving forward. The meeting took place in the Grand Hall of the Assembly, with representatives from every member species in attendance. Admiral Tanaka and Fleet Admiral Okafor arrived in dress uniforms, flanked by an honor guard of human Marines, whose presence made many of the assembled diplomats nervous. The Concord owes humanity a debt that cannot easily be repaid, Kethra began, speaking for the Assembly. We acknowledge our past mistakes in how we treated your species, and we are prepared to offer full membership with all the rights and privileges that entails. Fleet Admiral Okafor smiled politely. We appreciate the offer, Ambassador, and we accept on certain conditions. She produced a data tablet and placed it on the table. First, all restrictions on human expansion and colonization are immediately lifted. Second, the technology blockades are permanently ended. Third, humanity will maintain complete autonomy over our military forces and their deployment. There was murmuring among the Assembly members, but no objections. They were in no position to negotiate. Fourth, Okafor continued, the Concord will contribute resources to the development of a galaxy-wide early warning network designed to detect any future threats similar to the Shadows. Humanity will oversee this project. And fifth, Tanaka added, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, the Concord will formally acknowledge that the decision to isolate and contain humanity was a mistake, not because it failed, but because it was wrong. The vote was unanimous. Humanity became a full member of the Galactic Concord that day, but everyone understood that the relationship had fundamentally changed. The humans were not joining as equals, but as something closer to protectors, guardians who had earned their position through fire and blood. In the years that followed, human fleets patrolled the galaxy's borders. Human weapons platforms guarded key systems, and human tactical doctrine became required study at every military academy in Concord space. The peace that had lasted 3,000 years continued, but now it was a peace enforced by those who truly understood war.